I'm JP Parker. I'm just here to host and introduce our wonderful presenter for this session. This is Guidance from Ancient Feminine Lineage, Narratives and Stories. Our presenter is Megan Ward. A brief introduction of Megan. Her life has been influenced by a love of nature and a curious mind. She is a scientist, yogini, and naturalist, and she is now focused on sharing stories we may have forgotten. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land that we stand on and we're gathered on today, the Turrbal and Yagera people. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and for the continuing sharing of their lineage of their stories. I welcome you here today in person and those who are with us remotely. There's something quite tangible again to have this human connection, which I really value. This story has been partly inspired by my life experiences, but also by an environmental movement I began 18 months ago. This movement, while it was extremely challenging and took me into a world I was not familiar with, also gave me gifts from nature, and which I would repeat the exercise again because it was very rewarding. Today, I would like to set the stage, so to speak, with a small introduction before we go into the story. Have you ever watched the wonderment of a young child in nature? Every few steps, they must crouch down and observe in the utmost detail some new discovery. Curious minds, open minds, full of potential to receive, like an open vessel, inviting that knowledge in. Where all the sensory perceptions are alive and awoken, like a wild animal or a tree, listening, feeling, and breathing. As we become older, we begin to cram in labels, words, methods of identifying. And over time, rather than being these extraordinary multisensory beings, we become a little bit more like mono beings. And along with this can come the comparisons. Failing, judgment, lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, anxiety, and stress. While all the while more information is thrown at us. Are we becoming wiser, or are we simply becoming more informed on one linear horizontal plane, rather than living in this world of creativity and imagination that has the ability to elevate us higher and higher between heaven and earth? For in nature, every creature, thing, form, and substance has its own spirit, intelligence, and language. Trees, celestial bodies, water, rocks, river, they all have stories to share, layer upon layer. We once knew how to listen. We simply need to once more learn how to tune in. Today, as we sit here collectively in our roles in climate activism, we are exposed on a daily basis to the chaos, collapse, and destruction of the world as we know it. And we are fully aware of the consequences of this. How can we continue to live rich and abundant lives fueled by our passions and creativity and achieve all that is within us? Well, we have two very powerful allies. It is in the air that you are breathing at this moment. It is in the pot plants in the room. It is in the forest floor when you walk outside. And it is in the wind that winds through the trees. It is our shared breath and all of nature. For we do not just live on this earth, we are the earth, and nature is our sacred home. It is an inclusive, infinite world that provides such nourishment and inspiration and creativity. And it has all of the answers that we seek. I invite you now into this world through my story, which is fed from the wells of all stories. And so we begin. Once upon a time, there was a young girl. She was very shy, in fact, extremely shy and very sensitive. But perhaps what was most remarkable about her were her sapphire blue eyes. For when people looked into them, it seemed reflected back were an infinite number of tiny pinpoints of crystal lights. It was rather disconcerting. Because this little girl was so sensitive, she struggled to live in the human world. She could sense the underlying tension, the chaos, the conflict, and the anger. So she chose to spend all of her waking hours that she could and her dream time in nature. When she would enter the forest, she would feel her breath drop deep into her belly, permeating into the trees, the earth, and the water. She could hear the flight and the song of the birds, the shadow of the leaves, and the cry of the wind. The entire forest would breathe life into every cell in her body, and she would feel awoken and alive. All her sensory perceptions stimulated and manifesting. And when the rains came, they would surge through the creeks like blood pouring through her veins, transforming the forest yet again. Time passed in the human world. The little girl became a young woman. During this time, the world had become even more fractured, chaotic, and collapsed. This in turn affected her natural world until she had nowhere left to turn. So the tension came to claim her like a cobra snake squeezing her life force. Her body became tight and controlled, and her mind cluttered and confused. One day she was driving and her arms locked on the steering wheel. Her foot hit the accelerator and she pressed it like it was a lead weight, unable to stop, unable to feel, and then pulled over, depleted and numb. She got out of her car and began to walk towards the ocean. As she walked, the sand was soft and yielding. She came to the water's edge, still numb. The waves came in and out. In and out. A little space appeared in her cluttered mind, and a thought appeared. It feels like the ocean is breathing me. Her belly softened as the cobra snake began to release its grasp. She felt an invitation to enter the water, so she removed her clothes and dived in. And as she began to swim into that great body of water, suddenly these same thoughts that had been in her mind suddenly appeared as tall towers full of compacted, cluttered thoughts. And they kept popping up like some video game trying to block her. But somehow the water was supporting her, and she was able to elegantly and effortlessly swim past until they became transient shadows of their previous selves. As she swam deeper, the water became darker, and the ocean began to mingle with her blood as her cells remembered. The ocean breathed her as she swam to the bottom of that deep body of water, and came to rest on the fertile sandy bed. Feeling completely at peace, she closed her eyes, and as she did, she became enfolded in an unfathomable pitch blackness. But she relinquished into that darkness, and then ever so slowly, tiny pinpoints of crystal lights began to appear. Time passed in the human world. She was walking on Guarana land. Huge granite rocks and tall, towering trees with elegant trunks and the canopies extending up to the heavens. She was looking for a mother tree to sit with for a while to have a yarn. She listened. Nope, no invitation there. As she walked, each step revealed clouds of nutrient-rich bacteria that began to absorb into her skin and lungs. Meanwhile, an invisible web began to weave around her. As she turned the corner, there was her invitation. It was an ancient tree, grounded, sitting proudly in the earth. At some point, lightning had struck this tree, and she had plunged this energy and taken it deep into her bones beneath the soil. Her branches extended out laterally over long distances. She had such confidence. The young girl began to feel the umbilical cord pulling her towards the tree. She stepped carefully over the buttress roots and came to kneel next to the tree. She began to close her eyes and she reached her hand to place her hand on the trunk. But even before her hand reached it, she was flung through a tunnel of unfathomable pitch blackness. And she found herself on the other side, flying on the wings of an eagle. And as she flew, she was simultaneously flying across countries, deserts, rivers, and valleys. As she looked beneath her, she could see a vast interconnecting network of synapses firing, and each time they did, she would be flung off to some distant land. Tears of joy fell down her cheeks as she realized that everything in this world is interconnected. The clouds gathered her tears and shared them with the trees beneath her. Time passed, more time in the human world as it does. She was sitting, feeling, breathing, and tuning in to the subliminal symphony of a living, thriving forest. It was a rich yet busy melody as everything was breathing in unison. Occasionally, there would be a disturbance. A bird of prey would fly too close to the nest, or two beetles having an altercation, or a tuft of grass debating with some moss. But these would be brief, and then the melodic tempo would begin again with a gentle rhythm carrying the conversations. A soft wind began to move through the forest, and as it did, for the first time, she observed all of the receptors in the trees turning to receive the stories that the wind was carrying. But it was the wisdom keepers, the trees, that took these stories and took this knowledge and plunged it deeply down into their vast network beneath the earth to some different horizon. Time passed in the human world. The sun had begun to cast long shadows as she slowly raised herself off the chair and began to walk towards the forest. As she entered, her presence stirred the wind, And as the wind came through the forest, she turned her head, as did all the branches of the trees. As she received her story, a smile washed through her body. She anchored her feet firmly into the earth, and with each breath, she sunk a little bit deeper. A ray of light broke through the canopy, and she turned her face to receive the light. And then the trees took this light from within her and began to wrap her in a cloud of mist. And now the information that was settling into her feet and into her aerial roots began to rise, stirred by the rhythm of her body into her womb, where they mingled with her lived experiences and radiated out in concentric circles. The universal breath began to grow within her as her bark and her trunk developed. And then her branches began to caress in a sensual dance through the air. And all through the long hours of that dark night, she continued to grow. And then ever so gradually, the dark night began to be illuminated with an infinite number of tiny pinpoints of crystal lights. A constellation had been born. Time passed in that human world, and a little girl felt the ocean breeze touch her face, and she got off the little picnic rug, and she began to toddle with that one-pointed determination she had somewhere to go. As she toddled, she would fall and pick herself up again, mingling with the earth. She came to some beautiful buttress roots and began to crawl over them, and then stood on two strong little legs between heaven and earth. She took her little arms up to embrace the tree, and as she did, she let her belly soften against the warmth of the trunk. And so the connection began again between mother and child. The reverberation of knowledge began to transfer, the creation of stories and song between mother and child. And as she turned her head to place her cheek on the tree, her sapphire blue eyes became illuminated with an infinite number of tiny pinpoints of crystal lights. And that is my story to share with you today.
Applause.
We have a few minutes, so I think it would be wonderful if we could maybe just sit in reflection and share any thoughts or feelings. To prompt this, I would like to share something very beautiful. I've been reciting this story to members of my family, and 2 nights ago I shared it with one of my daughters. A few hours later, I asked her, "What did you feel? What touched you in that story?" And she reflected for a moment, because she said, "I don't want to give you just a trite answer." And she said, "It felt like a love letter to nature." And I think that just articulated it quite beautifully.
So agree. That was absolutely stunningly gorgeous, Megan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are part of the Narratives Hub, yes?
I'm about to join.
Okay. We really would love your presence and your gift. Oh my goodness, how magnificent. I'll begin with my response is I was transported into the forest with her. Yeah, I felt myself just connected with the trees. and put my cheek on the tree too. It was just lovely. Thank you so much for that. Anyone online who would like to comment or ask her a question, just click on the hand raise under reactions on your screen, and anyone in the room, I can't see you unfortunately, so Megan, you'll have to call on them.
So the online people, they will George, let's speak into the. Yeah, sorry.
Bit away.
How's this, JP? Can you hear me?
Just fine, thanks.
Thank you, Megan.
My pleasure.
I think there's a lot to take away or reflect on, but I have to say, because this conference has been all manner of things, it took me quite a while to soak into your performance, because that's what this was. And at some point I was like, I just wish I was sitting on the floor in a darkened theatre to hear the story, rather than, and it's in such a contrast. My brain was chunk, cogging down from some political theory presentation to come into story time, but so rich as well. The story is so rich, and it's so beautiful to see, and I haven't for such a long time, performance, perhaps because of COVID as well, but using your whole body to tell a story.
Yes.
Which is such an art and such a simple thing, but and we could all do, but we just don't very much. So thank you for bringing that to me.
Thank you. It's a gift that needs to be shared. And yes, I can relate to the needing to come from the busy mind of analyzing, it's not reflection, it's actually the thinking mind, which is the mind we often in this world live in. But it's the quiet, still, receptive mind where the clarity comes to us, and that magic comes to us, so that higher knowledge, that beautiful world of imagination and creativity. So it's hard to switch between the two.
Unless you're swimming like you were in the story. That was also beautiful. That brought me back to the remembrance of how the water and the earth will take all of this noise from us if we just offer ourselves to it and become embodied in those elements. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
I'd like to add.
Yeah, I guess adding to what Jay had to say, but I guess I'm going to ramble now a bit, but I guess when there was a moment of silence within that performance, and I just felt absolute goosebumps, and I was just like, oh no, you need to start doing something quick because I cannot feel it anymore. But I was reminded of Dr. Mary Graham's talk, which I think attended earlier this week. And she said something during that talk where she was like, the land gives birth to us. And I think with time, we as humans have become disconnected between us and the land. And I guess when you said that your daughter said that it was a love letter to nature, for me, I felt it was a love letter to self.
Yes.
Which is coming back to being connected to land, which is also what we are, like we're nature and we're land. And there is sort of not that distinctness between us, but we like to draw that distinctness and boundary, but it's actually not there. And I guess like even when you said there are two things that, connects us, which is the air and, plants and things like that. I remember another elder telling me, because I remember talking to them and saying that I feel very disconnected to nature. And they're like, you're always breathing. So you're always connected through air. So those are kind of some reflections that came out.
Beautiful.
So
yes.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. every part of that story was either come to me in dream time or my actual experience. So our communication, our interspecies communication is very real. When I say that everything has an intelligent spirit and language, it does. This plant today, because it's got a rich biome in the soil, it's listening, it's contributing, it's participating. And the one thing that for me, when I talk about living in nature, is such a rich and abundant state of being. It's actually pure love, because that's at the essence of what each of us are. And in nature, there's no separation. And even this morning, I was walking in a group of people, and you can't help but feel separate, because we're conditioned to be separate. When you're in nature, everything accepts you. You're part of it. You're in a symbiotic relationship with everything. And that's why it's so important that we can all get back into nature. Fast bathing, which is very popular now. But we know when we walk into a forest, we know when we touch a magnificent ancient tree, something changes in us. And that's the thing to key into. And that keeps us connected. Thank you.
Anyone else online or in the room? I have a question for you.
Yes.
Because you are listed as a scientist, I am curious, were you always a storyteller? And what is the relationship between science and storytelling in you?
The little girl in the forest was me. So I lived in a world of the underlying tension, anger, and conflict. So for me, did the storytelling begin then? I don't know. Or has it always been within me? Because the communication you have as a child, but you can't articulate it. I can articulate it now and I can scientifically understand it. But the connection that we all have when we're young children and we lose ourselves in the forest, that's listening to their stories. That's picking up the seeds of knowledge. Science is always with me, and the reason I chose science is I have an incredibly questioning mind. I mean, I can be really quite irritating. I have to understand everything. I have to know and deeply understand it. Being a yogini has been 40 years of yoga practice daily, and embodied yoga into my being through the 5 paths of yoga. The final path is called Vedanta, or self-knowledge. And in self-knowledge, which is actually what yoga means, the union of oneself, which means you dissolve the ego or your maya, that which separates us from who we are, truly. That gave me the ability to have a clear mind and a receptive mind. And when I came back to Australia, once you've realized the self within you, you have a duty to share that. So I began storytelling as a way of teaching my clients, or imparting knowledge to my clients. Then returning back into nature, I've been developing a wildlife sanctuary for 7 years, and that's been my mentor for 7 years, and that's been my mentor. She's been my communicator, and it actually engages 5 endangered ecosystems, critically endangered ecosystems. So the richness and the biodiversity of that, living and embodying in that inclusive, being inclusive in it and being part of it. And I've been searching for 3 years to try and find a way to interconnect people back into nature. And every time I had an idea, there was a no in me. And then when I stumbled on storytelling, it was the huge yes. So was it always in me? Has it been gifted to me? I think when we share a story and we've felt it, we've embodied it, that's the power of storytelling.
And you do embody it absolutely beautifully. Thank you so much, Megan. Anyone else before we come to a close?
Okay, yeah, I'm curious because you've called it guidance from ancient feminine lineage. Do you draw on some lineage? Is there a body of stories like this?
Are you familiar with mother trees? So mother trees hold the ancient feminine lineage in them. Gaia, Mother Earth, holds that ancient feminine lineage. That is where my stories come from, is the connection to Gaia, to that self within us, the embodiment of every woman who walks this earth carries this knowledge in their genes, in their DNA. It's within us, within each of us. But nature is a powerful ally, and when you can communicate on this level, for nature is a state of love, care, compassion, these qualities that we hold as females, they're intrinsic. When we give birth, there's a DNA memory that goes into each of our children. So intuitively, we know if they're in trouble. That's not imagination. That is an energetic connection. And that lineage is between mother and child. And it's infinite and it's inclusive. So when I draw on that, it's to remind us again that this beautiful earth that we inhabit, she is love, she is care, she is compassion, collaboration, inclusiveness. And every time we walk out into nature, I mean, what could be more informed than the breath that we breathe is informed every second of our lives by the trees that inhabit this earth. And those trees that take that knowledge deep down within them and store them on a horizon that we can't see in our world is the most ancient lineage. And we're gifted as females to carry that.
How does that work for the fellas?
Sorry?
How does that work for the fellas? Because you're saying it's inclusive, but it feels like it's just
mother
women.
and child. Mother and child, the mother gives birth to men and women, to boys and girls. And there's a symbiotic relationship between whatever child is born. Men do, and they can develop this connection. It's just women have an extra advantage because we are the birth givers. We are creation. We are Mother Gaia. So we can help to inform all the people in our lives. Does that answer your question?
Partially.
Well, please, we have time. What haven't I addressed?
Because we're only half of giving birth.
Yes, but we hold the child. You're correct, but we hold the child. We give life to that child. That child is nurtured in our womb. And through that process, there is this umbilical cord I referred to in the story, this invisible connection. There is a beautiful synchronicity between the men and women. And it's actually, if we look at indigenous communities where they found this balance, there was the same respect, the same love for nature, the same communications with nature. But women are the wisdom keepers. And I don't know how else to explain that. Yes, or perhaps in yin and yang. Perhaps yin and yang is a good tool. It's relative. Everything in life is relative. It's a circling, living, dynamic, changing movement of relativities. And at some point when one part becomes a bit weak, the other part will come in and strengthen it and support it. Giving that birth comes through the woman. That is a given at this point in life. And with that comes that DNA. Now, the shared creation between mother and father is equal. but the women do carry that DNA.
I think you need to be careful that not every person is a man or a woman.
I know. I was just going to try. That's why I'm trying to go like this, and each child rather than man and woman. I do want to acknowledge that I was reflecting on this today. In nature, apart from the mother trees, we don't say that's a male. Well, we do actually, don't we, in science? But in actuality, nature doesn't see it like that. Nature sees everything as a symbiotic creation. There is no differentiation. So I totally agree, which is why I'm trying to come away. And perhaps that's what you're saying when I talk about the woman's wisdom or the woman's lineage. I don't know how else to say, but it exists. It doesn't mean it can't exist in other bodies, but there is definitely a lineage between the females, feminine energy, which is balanced with the masculine energy. This comes back here, or the. And we all are a mixture of masculine and femininity. I'm not just a female, I'm also have masculinity within me. So we get into labels in this world. If we can get away from labels, the fact that there is a female lineage is, from my experience, is actual. It's my lived experience. But within that, there is a whole mix of the universal combination.
I wanted to ask about your land, but I'm not sure if that's part of this.
You can if you like.
Sorry, that probably sounds terrible for the people online. I did, yeah, thank you. I did want to ask about your land, your wildlife place that you said.
Yeah,
whereabouts is it?
In northern New South Wales, and it's an area of high biodiversity conservation value because it lies between the Pacific Ocean and the alluvial lands of a river. So it encompasses coastal dunar lands, coastal wetlands, littoral forest, and wet and dry sclerophyll forest. And as such, 3 of these are critically endangered ecosystems within Australia at the moment. So it's a beautiful opportunity to see how nature repairs herself when she's given a chance. But it's a wildlife sanctuary, so it's, that's the land. It's called Tekapowai Sanctuary, and Tekapowai is a tribute from New Zealand, and Tekapowai means dragonfly, and that name came to the land because besides there's lots of dragonflies and butterflies there, dragonfly is one of the oldest insects, thousands of years old, and it has the ability to change, to transform, to adapt, which I think are healthy attributes.
And if I'm not mistaken, they're a totem for the dreaming.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Beautiful. Anyone else? I think we may also have been taken into deep space by your beautiful story.
Yeah.
I certainly have. So, all right. Anything, Megan, that you would like to share in closing?
No, I'd just like to thank each of you for being here, for sharing this moment collectively. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So applause, blessings, gratitude. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Happy Sunday. Enjoy the rest of what appears to be a beautiful day, pretty much all around the country. So cheers all, and thank you so much again. Bye.